All right, welcome everybody to Booze Hour Cloud Edition today. Today we've got on a special guest, Rick Salsa, and I will bring him on in just a moment. Now, if you weren't watching on Monday, Daryl and I were live Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. for about 30 minutes. We're going to do that every week from now on, or at least as much as we can. It doesn't look like I can actually pull that off this weekend because I'll be out of town, but I'll have something for everybody on Monday anyways. The 30 minutes that we are on live, we encourage people to jump on, ask us any questions you might have, whether it be about F5 or Nginx or Shape, or you just have some sort of random question that you want us to answer, you want to tell us about your weekend. We're there to interact with you on Monday mornings. Now, on this past Monday morning, we actually had our guest for today on, and he went through our traditional or trademark Q&A. So that was Rick Salsa that was on. And so if you are, once you're all done watching this one, you can go back and check out Rick's Q&A to learn more about Rick. If you're watching from YouTube right now, I'll encourage everybody to hit subscribe right down below here. If the button is red right now, that means that you have the opportunity to click subscribe. You can also click a like if you've been liking the content as well. All of that helps us and encourages us to keep moving along with this. If you are listening to this via podcast right now, please do click subscribe if you can. If you haven't realized already, we do have this available in audio only format. So that's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Any of those, it looks like more and more people are actually listening to us these days, and that's accelerating and might overtake who knows how many people that are actually watching us via YouTube. So I make it available on there. There's also darylandboo.com. So if you head over there, we have a mailing list right now. I have a weekly mailing or a weekly newsletter that we drop, and right now Daryl actually sends that out individually from his email, from his F5 email, but we are moving that to a little bit more of a managed format. So all the weekly technical content is that we go over every Monday is actually put into a newsletter format, which is what Daryl sends out, and then I'm putting that into the managed newsletter. And then the one that Daryl sends out will actually turn into a bit more of a monthly digest now. And then with that one, it'll just be a lot more of a summary. So if you want more of the deeper technical info that we're putting out, and I'm adding more to it as we go along here, then you have a couple weeks left of Daryl's weekly technical newsletter, and all of it's going to shift over to the more managed newsletter going forward. So I think that's everything. I will remind everybody that there was also the the show live stream yesterday with Ethan Banks. Awesome show. We had him on for 60 minutes, and we just talked about all sorts of stuff about the beginning of packet pushers. If people aren't familiar with packet pushers, huge IT networking podcast and really media outlet at this point. And he's been doing that for 10 years. Had him on, somebody that I've been following for 10 years. So it was really cool to have him on the show. Talked about that. We talked about fat bikes. Had a really good time with Ethan. So check that out if you haven't yet. Otherwise, I will go ahead and bring on Rick. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
Hey, Boo. Good, thanks. How are you doing today?
I am well, thanks. Yeah, we really enjoyed having you on the weekly update there for the Q&A. It was interesting to learn more about you and how you're into sneakers. I don't know if you saw the pictures I edited in there.
I did. I watched it. Yes. I don't know if I can ever compare to Daryl's sneaker collection, but yes, definitely started at a young age, and it seems to have passed on to my oldest son, who's into way more expensive sneakers than I am.
Nice. Oh, right on. How's so for folks who didn't catch that on Monday, Rick is actually the other F5 coworker that myself and Daryl have in BC. So, and he was here before us too. Daryl and I have been around for 9 years. You've been around for 12.
Yes, yeah, yeah, about 12 years. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when folks ask me and Daryl, I mean, we're the only F5 employees that are in the greater Vancouver area. We don't have an office. People usually ask us, hey, where's the F5 office? And we're like, no, there's no office. And there's actually only two of us in Vancouver. And
Yeah.
then sometimes we choose whether or not we want to mention Rick's existence or not, since we don't usually bring Rick out in front of customers. But now we are because of the stuff that you have transitioned into. So you've
Right.
moved from different roles, and you're now a product owner. Is that what we call that now?
Yeah, product owner, product manager for a couple of services that we have in our new cloud offering. They're the DNS and the DNS load balancing cloud services.
Cool. And maybe we can dial things back a bit, but this is
Yeah,
very different for F5, right? Like
that's right.
before, traditional F5 was, hey, I get my big IP. First of all, it wasn't even virtual. So I get my appliance, unbox that, shove it into a rack, plug everything in, and I flow traffic through it. And then we did virtual editions. So, hey, I
Right.
got an ISO or a OVA or whatever format you download it in, and now I can have big IP in a software format. And then I've always had customers ask us, hey, when are you guys going to do as a service? And we have Silverline, which is a managed service, but that's a high touch, white glove. You're paying for a managed service. And then we came out with cloud services, and we started adding services really quickly. But that really filled a need, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So as I'm sure your viewers are all aware, right? There's this massive shift going on today where we're moving a lot of our workloads up into the cloud, and companies are starting to experience a lot of cost savings, right? In not having to worry about managing hardware anymore and shifting a lot of that responsibility to these cloud vendors, right? And so the cloud services platform is kind of is our SaaS platform to kind of help F5 customers in that transition and start providing, the best breed software that we have at F5, but in kind of a SaaS platform for where, we manage the infrastructure, we manage the control plane and the data plane and the scalability. Essentially, you, the customer, you bring your workloads, you bring your services to us, and you control them, you configure them and manage them. We make sure that they're always available and performant.
Awesome. And I think what people will really appreciate about cloud services, well, first of all, is the not having to manage the platform anymore. So it's taken care of by the team. And then the other piece of it is just how quickly you guys can add features to it. Like it seems like every few weeks I'm getting some sort of
Yes.
update that a certain one of the cloud services has added a whole bunch of new features, and it's just and everybody just gets it immediately.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the benefits and why companies love to move to software as a service solutions, right? Is essentially you're always running on the latest and greatest version of it. There's no, you don't have to worry about scheduling maintenance windows or anything like that. The service is constantly updating. So as we add functionality, as we learn more, work with our customers, and discover new use cases, it's quite easy for us to get those changes out into production and pushed out to all the regions that we're available in. And again, the customer benefits from that, right? That quick innovation and iteration time that we have.
That's pretty cool. And so, as the product manager for it, you're the one that kind of calls the shots for what gets prioritized. Or
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say I call the shots. It's really, honestly, it's really a team effort. The team that we have, that I have for the cloud services team, really are kind of the brain. Well, obviously, the brains behind the service. But I strongly feel that involving the engineering team and having them understand the problem space leads to a better product. So I really try to engage my engineering team in everything that we're doing. And in terms of prioritization, we as a team have goals that we're looking to achieve, and we look to improve there in terms of, what are we going to prioritize next that's going to help us kind of achieve these goals that we've set out. So it's not just me, unfortunately, calling the shots. Sometimes I wish it was. It's not always the case.
And so that's a call out to anybody who's listening right now, because Rick may or may not call the shots. You can put in your comments into the YouTube chat right now, and Rick will tell you yes or no whether or not he'll add that feature or not. No, it doesn't quite work like that. I understand. The cloud services that you cover, though, so you're just covering a specific set of the cloud services, the
Right.
DNS portion of it, right?
That's right. Yeah. So today in cloud services, we essentially have a couple of services in market. So we have the DNS cloud services, which I'm the product manager for. We have a web application firewall we call Essential App Protect. That's another service that we have. And then we have our visibility solution, which we call Beacon, which is handled by another product team. So essentially we have a number of different product groups on F5, and we're essentially trying to take, again, things that customers have been using for years at F5 and some new ideas and bring them into the SaaS platform.
Yeah, very cool. And if I'm not mistaken, DNS was it the first cloud service that came out?
That's right. Yeah. So in about fall 2019, the DNS cloud service launched, and it launched as a secondary authoritative service. So essentially what that means is if you have DNS on premise, you can configure it to use F5 DNS cloud services as your public facing authoritative DNS servers. So you might have a DNS server that is in your DMZ behind a firewall that you maintain and manage control for all your DNS records. And then our solution essentially is configured to come and look for updates to your zone. So if you add a new DNS record, we'll get that. And then of course, we publish that in our DNS servers, and that goes out to all the data plane regions. So that was the first service that we launched. And then we shortly came out after that with our global server load balancing solution, which we call DNS Load Balancer.
Okay, awesome. Now we have actually our first question. Now it's not a demand, but
Okay.
from the cloud there, from Arvind actually. What products and features in the cloud that you're more excited about as compared to on-prem?
Oh, good question. My products. I actually, so being one of the first few services on cloud services, essentially, we're developing the SaaS muscle, if you will, within F5, and we're kind of we were one of the first teams to kind of pave the chart the waters. So there's a lot of cool new kind of innovative stuff coming out from F5 that different product groups are working on. Obviously, what we want to build on cloud services is that an F5 portal where all of the different services are part of a cohesive solution for our customers. So they can mix and match, pick and choose, but using the more that you use, the greater the benefit that you get. Our Essential App Protect is a super cool API driven web application firewall. For a team that doesn't have the strong skill set that you need for managing a WAF solution, Essential App Protect makes it super easy, right? The GUI is slick. In terms of innovation at F5, I would, I'm going to boast a little bit in that I think we have the sexiest interfaces out there today in F5, but it's a really kind of slick interface that gives you kind of a world map view of everything that's happening right now, all the attacks that you might be seeing. So they're doing some really cool stuff there. Beacon kind of continues to innovate, and they're working kind of on a really long-term picture vision of being able to give application owners better insights into their apps and understand kind of what's going on. And I'm getting kind of really excited for the DNS load balancer stuff. The things that the product that I work on day to day, we're really kind of starting to hit stride there, and we've got some really kind of interesting integrations kind of in the near term future that we're working on. That's going to hopefully allow people to improve their app with minimal changes to the app stack by just adding a intelligent DNS solution.
And it's scalable too, right? Like I think one of the things that when we talk to customers about the F5 traditional F5 DNS product is the scalability, but that's all there with cloud services too. So it's pretty compelling for even for existing F5 DNS customers to shift over to the cloud services, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you're absolutely correct. So the entire thing, so in terms of DNS or all of the solutions that are on cloud services, they're entirely cloud native, right? So they're built, from the ground up to be, kind of cloud native, born in the cloud type solution. So obviously, with that type of an architecture, as long as you're leveraging your underlying infrastructure well, yeah, the scalability possibilities there are easy, and it's really seamless to the customer, right? That's the benefit, is they don't really see anything, right? They just know that I enable this functionality and it's there, it's always available, and it scales as I need it to scale, and can manage kind of the workloads that I'm throwing at it. And one of the things with our service is, we have DDoS protection at the DNS layer. Again, that's something that is kind of difficult to manage and do, and scaling a DNS infrastructure globally is not an easy thing to do, right? There's, you need to worry about BGP and Anycast, and ensuring that, data, when you make changes to a zone, is quickly propagated out to the different regions that the authoritative DNS servers are running in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, actually, in that F5 kind of has the pedigree to deliver all of these services really well. I mean, if anybody was delivering these services, they would need a lot of F5 or Nginx anyways.
That's
So
right.
why not have F5 do it for them? I'm sure we have a lot of our, or we have, all of our own components kind of in there, and we can change them as needed.
That's right. Yeah.
And one of the things that I noticed lately, and I don't mean to get it too ahead of ourselves here, but one of the great things that we could do with F5 DNS was its integration with LTM. So for folks that would have local
Right.
traffic manager on-prem, awesome integration. All the intelligence that we'd have in LTM can then get propagated out to the DNS. But more and more of that stuff is moving out to cloud services. So it's way more of a reason for people to consider just moving their F5 DNS out into this.
Yeah, a primary reason that we get a lot of a lot of the customer engagements and customers that I talk to today, that primary reason is, we're modernizing our application stack, and at the same time we're looking to have our DNS service managed, right? IDC, there's an IDC threat report that came out last year that I talk a lot about with customers, and there was a really compelling statistic in there, and they were talking, I think, to Fortune 1000 companies, and 82% of them had experienced a DNS attack in the past 2 years at the time that report came out. So they want to move. So customers are wanting to move to a managed solution because DNS is as a threat vector, it's dangerous. If DNS is taken out, you essentially can wipe out a company off the internet. And we've seen that with other DNS attacks out there before. And so if you're managing DNS on your own, and you maybe have one or two, you might be, typical use cases, you're running a bind server, if you don't have any sort of DDoS scrubbing in place, then it's very easy to kind of get overwhelmed with a DOS attack. So it's kind of the benefit when you move to a managed DNS service in the cloud, is that redundancy is already built into the solution, right? And that we have data planes in multiple regions spread out around the globe, and BGP and Anycast allows us to kind of route around issues or failures in certain regions, but also kind of the DDoS protection that's happening there just helps companies to prevent those DNS attacks that they've been seeing, and leads to kind of costly downtime or unavailability for their services.
Makes total sense. Very cool. So I've put up Ask Us Anything on here. Anybody that's viewing right now, you're welcome to make your demands, because we have a product manager here. Yeah.
Well, I think you had mentioned something, and I was like, I think Boo may have actually read one of our latest release announcements. But we did just actually launch into production some updates to an integration that we have with Big IP LTM. And so kind of as you mentioned, a lot of customers with LTM and they're moving them to the cloud, this solution will work perfectly in the cloud, but it'll also work if your LTMs are on-prem still, or, in a private data center or co-location. But essentially the big IP LTM integration works with our DNS load balancing service. And it allows us, it gives us a way to be able to get the statistics from virtual servers that you're trying to do global server load balancing with DNS for, and then make intelligent traffic steering decisions, right? So how our services have kind of been operating up until today is that when you configure a pool with a bunch of pool members, and these could be big IPs, on-prem or in the cloud, the customer would configure an advanced or a health monitor. And so these health monitors would run from the different regions that we exist in. And essentially we're making, HTTP or HTTP requests to your virtual server and looking for a response code or looking for the response body to say, hey, yep, it's available. We can make that, decision to send traffic there. And so the load balancing methods that we would have, I kind of call them static methods, right? We could do round robin, we could do ratio or weighted based load balancing to those systems, or we can do something like a sticky session with a particular virtual server. Weighted, for example, ratio is great. For example, if you're doing a migration, right? If you're trying to go from on cloud to on-prem and you want to slowly kind of do like a blue-green type deployment, well, you could use ratio to do that, where you could adjust the weights and start sending more traffic over time to the new application instance that you might have running up in the cloud. With the integration with LTM, we have that insight into, not only do we know if the virtual server's state changes, right? Because the big IP is going to be telling us every 60 seconds, but we'll have the stats from the virtual servers themselves, right? So how many connections are they seeing? What's the packet rate that's going through the virtual server? Or how many backend pool members on the local virtual server are actually up and running? So now we can start getting more intelligent and do what I call dynamic traffic steering. Is that we can use the real-time data from the big IP to say, you know what, we've got a pool of big IPs, but we know that this pool member is seeing too many connections right now. We're going to start steering traffic and directing people to a different big IP at a different location that's seeing fewer connections. Or again, it's a matter of the number of available pool backend pool members to service the request, right? So those are kind of like the first few dynamic load balancing options that we've created, right? And now what we're essentially doing is we've got it out there, we're getting feedback, we're talking to customers, we're monitoring the service. Again, one of the benefits of having a software service in the cloud is we have the visibility into the performance of the system, so we can see how these things are working and kind of develop a better picture. So really, we're going to iterate from here and kind of try to understand, what types of dynamic real-time decisions will help customers ensure that you're getting your requests to a big IP or an Nginx instance that's going to give you the fastest response.
And that makes a lot of sense in that a lot of people's infrastructures, their quote unquote data centers are not all going to look the same now. Like it's not, just talked to somebody earlier this week where it's not, they're going from 2 exact copies of a data center to one of those potentially being a cold, warm standby site in AWS instead.
Yeah.
Figured totally differently. Probably going to have way different instance counts. They're going to try to rely on one, but they need to still have one kind of in play. Great use case for that. The deeper model.
Exactly. And we just recently added into production again a new load balancing option we call priority based load balancing, and it'll exactly work for the use case that you had mentioned. So you have a pool, and that could be a big IP on-prem and a big IP in that disaster recovery site or up in the cloud, and we will, as long as the highest priority endpoints in your pool are available, we'll favor those and we'll send traffic to that. But the moment they go down, then we fall back to the next highest priority. So you can use that in kind of in an active, exactly that use case, like a DR site, an active standby site. Another interesting use case that this enables, and we're starting to see from some of our larger F5 customers, is their CDN strategy, where they want to use multiple CDN providers, and how that would work, is depending on where your user base is, your primary CDN provider might not have good coverage in that area, right? So they may prefer to go with a local provider, a smaller CDN provider that has more endpoints or points of presence in that region. And so in terms of a priority-based traffic steering decision, you can give that local provider the priority in the DNS responses and use them. But of course, let's just say that something catastrophic happened and that provider disappears off the internet. Well, now you can fall back to that other provider, right? And in some cases, customers are starting to transition to these things, and I get really excited about the future, because the conversation then starts leading to making more intelligence decisions around cost optimization, right? Customers are further along in that journey, might be looking at, let's stick with CDN providers, the cost benefit, right? Certain vendors, there's different costs to those different CDN vendors, and so if I can tweak my DNS response in real time based on cost, right, with the provider and how much I'm pushing through, I can then start to favor a certain CDN provider that's going to help me optimize my costs in the long run as well.
That's a really cool use case, actually. Is that something a customer came up with?
Yeah, actually, there's quite a few customers that actually have that, and so whether it's CDN's one example, but you could translate that easily into multi-cloud, right? And so customers, after they've been in a cloud for a while, they start to see that there are certain options, or certain cloud providers have certain better pricing in certain areas than others, right? So you get to a point where you start looking to optimize your costs in the cloud, right? And hey, how can I better utilize this infrastructure that I'm running in different clouds from a cost perspective, right? Because I want to increase my ROI, obviously, and I want to save on costs where I can. So you can really start to do some interesting things when you start plugging some of those metrics into a DNS solution and using that to inform how you just send back a DNS response and say, hey, here's the IP address that you need to go to, Mr. Client, and off they go.
That's such a simple and elegant way of doing it too. Like, I have seen a lot of, not a lot, but a couple cloud cost management tools, and they do get very intricate. There's tons of detail to them, and it may even be worth like some sort of way to tie these two together. But those have a lot of buttons and knobs, whereas this is going to be a little bit more of a quick, easy solution to immediately have that effect. That's pretty cool.
Well, and honestly, DNS is, to me, the right place to do that thing, right? So adding something like DNS load balancer requires minimal changes to your application stack, right? And actually, you don't have to make any changes to your app, right? Essentially, you configure DNS load balancer, set it up with your pools. You've not made any changes to your app, and as long as your app's you've just immediately there increased the availability of your app if you're serving it up in different regions, because we can stop sending back a DNS response if we know a particular endpoint for your app or different is down and unavailable, right? No point in sending somebody to a virtual server, be it Big IP or Nginx, if all of the pool members attached to that local proxy are down, right? So we send them somewhere else, right? There's no need, direct them away from that 404 or that fail page, right? And send them to an available instance. And again, requires minimal changes to your application stack. And if you really think about it, it's the very first request that when a client is trying to get to your application that they make, it's DNS. So if you can start optimizing performance at the DNS layer, that's going to definitely help improve performance times for your application, right? You're routing them to the optimal instance, the closest instance that's going to give them the fastest response time.
Yeah. Oh, totally. You can imagine then people, almost like the CDN model, where if they're going to go multi-cloud, why not, instead of consolidating into a couple of regions, they could have very small regions set up, just if they're global, very small points of presence just spread out everywhere, and use something like cloud services DNS to just spread the traffic across the smaller data centers.
Yeah, exactly. And so global server load balancing, or what we call our DNS load balancing product, does exactly that, right? So it allows customers to use geolocation to send traffic to the closest instance, right? So you can do it that way. There's use cases where we're talking about, GDPR, and you need to keep traffic in the EU, right? So with DNS load balancing, you can do just that, right? You can look at the client request, and you can look at, whether it's the local DNS resolver, or there's a DNS protocol called eDNS 0 that we use in our service that can get a better idea of the client subnet and where they are in the world, and then we can take that and say, hey, we're going to send you off. So anybody from this particular region, we're going to make sure that you're going to the pool that has all of our pool members in the EU, right? So that we can ensure that that application traffic for those users is sticking within that region, right? So that's kind of, a use case for sure that we see customers using it for. And, one of the other things, actually, seeing as we're still kind of living in the time of COVID, a product that we're both really ultimately familiar with, APM, our remote access solution. When COVID happened, people, our customers had to get VPN infrastructure up fairly quickly, and now they're servicing kind of a global workforce in some cases. So DNS load balancer with APM is something that in the early, when we just started to get into this, we were seeing a lot of deployments around this. So customer running APM in multiple, regions, in the US, in APAC, and in EMEA, and then DNS load balancer would sit in front of that. And so DNS load balancer, essentially, you're going to vpn.yourcompany.com, and then we're just using geolocation to say, hey, we know that there's an APM instance closer to you over here, and send the traffic there. And so that's been working optimally for a lot of customers. It's really helped them quickly kind of scale and scale their remote access, so that their end users get access, to the applications they need back on the corporate network. But obviously, that's to get things up quickly. We can go more than that, right? And so these integrations with Big IP and using LTM, for example, I've seen some solutions that some of our solution architects have designed for customers, where they're using things like iStats and iCall to grab the connectivity limits from the APM. And they're saying, hey, we know that this particular APM is at max capacity for its license. So they've set up a health monitor to look for a check on that. So it hits an I rule that's listening at an endpoint, and it's coming back and saying, hey, this VPN endpoint is at capacity. And so we mark that VPN as down, and then we start sending them to the next closest VPN device, so that you're not going to a close, this VPN instance might be closest to you, but you've consumed all of your VPN licenses. There's no point in sending you there. We'll send you elsewhere that has capacity and can take the session on and get you access.
That makes total sense. So one point that you had there, and I know you had the GUI on the ready for if we needed to bring it up, but like how quickly, if you wouldn't mind showing us too, like how quickly can someone get this up and running?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's kind of it's a matter of minutes, right? So depending on how you've configured your DNS, the way the solution kind of works today is DNS load balancer sits as a separate service, and it's separate from our DNS cloud services, we call it. We do have plans to integrate these two to make essentially add the easy button to make adding load balancing to your DNS records even simpler. But today, essentially, we need to create what we call a load balancing record. And I've got a sample one in place here, but a load balancing record is essentially where we say, for up top here, I have a subdomain under my personal domain that I've delegated to do global server load balancing. So if I have, for example, www.ricksalsa.com, on the Apex domain, so ricksalsa.com, I have a CNAME record that's going to point out to www.gslb.ricksalsa.com. So that happens underneath the scenes. Your end users don't really see that, but the DNS resolvers automatically follow that redirection and come here to get the DNS answer. And in this load balancing record is where you define how you're going to steer the traffic. So this is a really simple record here where I just basically am saying anybody coming from anywhere, go to this single global pool that I have. And then down here is essentially where I specify the host, or the host wildcards that I want to use in this record. And then I can define the different DNS record type I'm going to use in my response, right? We have the ability to cache this information. So response caching is essentially a performance thing. So with this enabled, my client, if you're looking here on an IP for an IPv4 address on a /24, or I could change that to a /32 to say, hey, each individual client that makes a query request, cache the response you give them for an hour, right? This just increases the performance. We don't have to go and look through all the records to determine what to give back the end user. So this is a way to kind of reduce the load without changing time to live options on your DNS records, right? Because TTLs is how we kind of control how and often a client comes and looks for a response. So to add geolocation, if you already have regions set up in the solution, so for example, I have a region here called Americas, it's just a matter of me selecting the pool that I want to set up with. So if I want to create a new pool for the US, it's just a matter of hitting create a pool, adding an update, and I'll show you how to do this in a second with a big IP specific pool. But you just add some details, add some pool members, and you've got that new pool in there. And we added into the proximity rules. Proximity rules are the geolocation piece. So, this is where I could send something and say, hey, I'm going to provide a higher score to this geolocation option that's sending you elsewhere, right? So I could say the higher the score, the more frequently the rule gets used. So here, this is a more specific rule with a higher score. So anybody from the Americas would be getting sent to the pool that I have listed here. Now, obviously, I've only got the one pool set up so far. So, this is a bit of a redundant rule, but hopefully that kind of gives you the perspective of how that works. So now, in terms of how you typically go about configuring this. Now, DNS Load Balancer will, what I typically tell customers is it'll work with anything that has an IP address on the internet that we can reach. It doesn't need to be a big IP, doesn't need to be an Nginx ADC. It just needs to have an IP address that we can reach, and you can put it inside a load of a load balancing pool. So normally what you do is you create something that we call IP endpoints. And so here I've got a couple of endpoints listed for two different data centers. And typically you would go and add all of your devices or all of your endpoints that are going to become pool members inside of your load balancing pools. Now, we've been around F5 long enough, and we've seen some pretty big F5 installations. So you can imagine a big IP that has hundreds of virtual servers on it, and trying to come in and manually import them, or create them one by one by one by one, it can be a fairly onerous task. So this is where the integration that we built with Big IP, and we look to built in with Nginx or Nginx Plus, is we kind of have a simplified workflow, right? So this uses a iControl LX extension that we have on our F5 Networks GitHub repository site called telemetry streaming. And telemetry streaming, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, is an agent that runs locally on the Big IP and can gather info about the virtual servers and the pools that you want to make our service aware of. And then you can just go ahead and easily import those into our service with a couple of clicks. So Again, imagine I've got multiple sites, and I'd have more than one big IP here. I can simply kind of click on the device, the big IP device, and import all of the available virtual servers that I have on that device. So, for example, if I were to click through this, I can import these 3 virtual servers. Or I can go and I can look at it from a virtual server perspective, right? So I can go and select and filter all of the virtual servers that I have, either by an IP address or by the host name or the virtual server name, and narrow down this list and select them to as an import into the service. So I'm going to select one here. It's a virtual server that I've got set up, hosting a simple WordPress site. And then the second part of the workflow is just one way to say, hey, you know what? If this virtual server is sitting inside a DMZ and it's got a private IP address, here's your opportunity to go and put a public IP address here. So, to put in the NAT, right? The destination NAT, the public IP address there. This has got a public IP attached to it already, so I don't need to do anything there. But once I click on import, it just brings in the big IP and all of that information into the service. So now I can start adding this big IP to a pool and start making, those dynamic load balancing decisions. So if I go and create a big IP specific pool, I have that option now. You can see down at the bottom here, these are the dynamic load balancing methods that we have. So once we have telemetry data from a big IP device, Nginx in the future, we can make these decisions here. So I'm just going to go and select fewest connections, right? So let's send the traffic to the big IP with the fewest connections, and then we go and we add our pool members to that system. So if I had more big IPs, I would go and specify more big IPs. And as the administrator, this option here allows me to say how many responses do I want to give when somebody tries to hit the www host record for this particular pool. So if I had multiple server instances in there, or if I was using something like priority and I had a list of higher priority endpoints, I could tune that number here, but we're just going to kind of leave this at 1. And so that pool is created. And now all that needs to happen is essentially you can go back into your load balancing record and add that pool. So if I were wanting to say, for example, this pool that I just created was in the US region, and I want to steer users in the US to that big IP pool, I can go ahead and I can add that into the list. And now I'm sending traffic, anybody that's inside of the Americas. And the Americas is this region is a continent one. So this is, I'm looking at, I've grouped North America and South America into there, and we can send that to all of the big IPs that we have, in different locations within that region. And of course, if all of the big IPs in that pool for whatever reason were to come unavailable, then we can fall back to this default global rule and say, hey, we have this backup pool with big IP devices, in a DR site that can service the request, as an example. So that's kind of another way that you can do that, or do this fallback for geolocation-based routing. But the nice thing about it, again, is we added the big IP, and setting it up on the big IP is literally an API call. So once you have telemetry streaming enabled, it's an API call to configure it, to send the data up to cloud services. And then you saw how easy it was to kind of import a big IP into the configuration and add it to a load balancing rule. But all you need to do is just save that and save that, and the changes get propagated out into all of the different data plane regions that we have globally. And now you've got global server load balancing up and running.
That is super slick. So I didn't have the timer up, but that was under 5 minutes, I'd say. So.
Oh, and I was talking a lot too. If I knew you were timing me, I could have probably got it done within under 60 seconds.
But way faster than importing all the virtual servers by hand. That's the...
Yes, exactly. And the big thing about that too is not only are you not having to import all of the virtual servers, but just assume you have, think of it this way from a monitoring perspective. The big IP collects it and sends it to us in one request. Rather than us going and making, multiple different monitoring checks to those big IPs, right? So if you have a big IP that's serving up 50 different applications, without this integration, that potentially could be 50 different monitors that are going to the big IP at random intervals and frequencies from multiple locations globally, checking for the update of that. So this is a little bit different. It's a push up to us. We have kind of an endpoint that takes in the data and normalizes it for our service. And then, we have it in our data plane regions, immediately, and we can make the decisions on how we're going to steer the traffic. So it gives us like that, again, that real-time snapshot of, hey, what's going on with each individual big IP that you have in your environments and you're doing DNS load balancing for.
Totally.
And then where this obviously gets really cool in the future, and what excites me about cloud services is, we're building this this endpoint to essentially be the endpoint, the ingestion endpoint for all of F5 cloud services, right? So we're going to make it very simple for customers to say, hey, I'm sending you a stream with big IP. I don't have to go and configure a different one for DNS load balancer or configure a different stream for Beacon or any other services that we add to the future. It's a stream that's coming in, and essentially you can say, hey, I know I've got big IPs that are sending telemetry data to cloud services. I want to enable that for these different services. And then, for example, we can take that and say, hey, we can use that for traffic steering decision, or a service like Beacon can say, hey, we can take that telemetry data and we can present to you how your apps are performing from that single pane of glass up in the cloud within the Beacon interface.
Super cool. I'll wind this down from here, but how easy is it for folks to sign up for the service?
Super, super, super easy. Literally, you just have to go to portal.cloudservices.f5.com and kind of register your account. I think if we got so you just hit portal.cloudservice.f5.com and just go ahead and walk through one single step to set up your cloud services account, and then you have access to anything that we offer on cloud services. And now is actually a really good time if you actually want to try these services out. We do have for DNS, for the DNS cloud services and Essential App Protect, we're offering customers 15-day free trial to be able to kind of use the service, create a load balancing record, test it out, see how it works in your environment. Or if you want to see what it's like to use a WAF service in the cloud, enable that trial, easy to set up. EAP is pretty much as simple as the DNS load balancer. It's a matter of a couple of clicks, informing us of where your app is, and immediately you've got a web application firewall spun up in the cloud that's scalable, protecting your application.
Totally cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on, Rick. Lots of info there. We'll, for everybody who's going to visit this afterwards, I'm going to put a bunch of those links into the description below and into the show notes if you're listening to this via podcast. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. If you're an F5 customer and you're interested in the LTM integration, we'll make sure that Boo gets it into the notes, but it's f5.com/preview. And so essentially, signing up for the preview for the LTM integration allows you the opportunity to work with me and my team. And essentially, we're using that to get as an opportunity to talk to more customers and learn more about, the challenges they have in scaling their applications and how we can, improve our service and make it more valuable to everyone.
Very cool. Well, even more incentive to jump on that then, that they get to work with you, Rick.
Yes, who wouldn't want to work with this face, right? Like, come on.
Cool. Alrighty, Rick. We will see everybody on Monday. There will be, like I said, I'll be away, but I will record something, and we'll still have our technical newsletter that will come out. And then we're still firming up, but we'll have at least one great, I'll be away for part of next week, so we'll have at least one great live stream planned for next week that I will, I'll get all the thumbnails and stuff done so that I can announce that soon. All right. Thanks for jumping on, Rick. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll see everyone next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for checking this out today. If you're watching via YouTube right now, go ahead and click subscribe down below. Also click the bell for notifications. That way you will find out when we are dropping a new video or when we're going live. Also, there's darylandboo.com. If you head over to that, leave your name and email address, we will drop a weekly technical newsletter in your inbox every Monday. Also, this is available via podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. Head over to one of those, hit subscribe, and you'll be able to listen to us in the car on your commute or during a walk or a run. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.